"You don't belong here," the woman hissed, voice sharp as a cracked bottle. Wind scraped along the alley behind the row houses, and little Emma flinched as if the syllables themselves could bruise. Her fingers were red with cold. She hid them in the sleeves of a thin, fraying cardigan and stared at the only beautiful thing she owned, a creased Polaroid. In it, a younger version of her mother laughed at something outside the frame, sunlight caught in her hair. Emma traced the picture's white border the way some people trace the edges of a prayer. The stepmother, Jolene, stood in the back doorway, one heel braced against the rotten threshold, arms folded under a coat that didn't fit her meanness. "Hear me? Take your trash and go. Your father's not here, and I'm done." The door slammed. A deadbolt thunked, final as a gavel. Emma didn't cry. Not at first. The cold did that for her, knitting watery diamonds along her lashes until one trembled free and fell onto the photograph, pooling in the dimple of her mother's cheek. She wiped it quickly with the hem of her sleeve and tucked the Polaroid into the pocket over her heart. Her breath came in thin, paper-sounding pulls. Somewhere, 2 streets over, a train sent a horn through the dusk, a low animal sound that made the birds lift blackly from the power lines. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. She gathered the small things that still meant home. A ribbon from her mother's hair, the tin button from her father's old work jacket, a cloth doll with a crooked smile. The doll's yarn hair was stiff from last night's sleet. When Emma tried to smooth it, a strand snapped. "Don't," she whispered to the doll, as if it might break more if she said the rest of the sentence out loud. Footsteps scuffed at the mouth of the alley. Emma's spine went taut. Run? Hide? She hugged the doll against her ribs. The footsteps paused, then a man's shadow stretched long across the blown grit and bottle caps. "Easy," said a voice that sounded like gravel and warmth at the same time. Ethan Cole stepped into the alley, wearing a faded camouflage jacket, rain dark at the shoulders, and a cap pulled low. He had that particular unshowy watchfulness of a soldier who's done listening to his own heartbeat and started listening to the world again. At his leg moved a German shepherd, broad-shouldered and patient. Duke, the kind of dog that didn't need to be told twice. Duke's tail made a careful, non-threatening sweep. He looked at Emma first, then at the door that had slammed, then back at Emma, as if he'd charted the entire story in 3 glances. "You okay there, kid?" Ethan asked. Emma nodded the way you nod when your neck is the only thing you can still control. "Mind if I come a step closer?" Ethan lifted both hands, palms out. Duke sat without a word from him, ears forward. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," Emma said, voice small and formal, like a rule recited in school. "Good rule," Ethan said. "I'm Ethan. He's Duke. We were on our way past when we heard someone forget how to speak human." At the mention of forgetting, Emma's mouth wobbled. She held the Polaroid tighter through the fabric. Ethan saw the motion, and something in his face softened. He slid a thumb under his collar and drew out a small locket on a chain, dented, old. He thumbed it once and then let it fall against his sternum, as if reminding himself it was still there. "Sometimes a picture is weight and wings at the same time," he said. Duke rose, took a patient step forward, and offered Emma a cautious, ceremonial sniff. Emma didn't lift her hands. She'd learned what happened when you reached for things. Duke solved it for her. He leaned until his shoulder pressed gently into her knee. Warmth came through denim like a permission slip. Emma exhaled a tiny, fogged laugh. A window slid up on the 2nd floor. Jolene's voice spilled out, knife bright. "You still here, brat? I told you to clear out. I'm calling the landlord and the cops. You hear me? You don't belong." Ethan tilted his head, listening, not to the threat, but to the tremor underneath it, the way people sound when they're used to winning by volume. He shifted,
so he stood between Emma and the voice, not big about it, just present. Duke's body mirrored the move. He angled himself to face the door and the street at once, a living wedge of calm. "What's your name, kid?" Ethan asked, without looking away from the doorway. "Emma," she said. "Emma," he repeated, like he was testing how the syllables felt in his mouth. "You got someplace you like better than here?" Emma touched the pocket where the Polaroid lay. Her voice went thin. "Wherever she is." The soldier nodded once, not because the answer made sense in the grown-up world, but because it made perfect sense in the only world that mattered right now. He crouched to Emma's height. Lines of old fatigue sat in his face like faded maps. Duke leaned into his thigh, the way a partner steadies a partner. "You hungry?" Ethan asked. "Cold?" "Yes," Emma said to both. Ethan straightened. "Okay, we fix what we can fix first." He tugged off his gloves and worked the zipper of his jacket loose with his teeth, then draped it over Emma's shoulders. It was far too big. She vanished inside it like a secret. The heat in the lining felt like a small sunrise. Jolene's second-floor window banged shut, then the alley door's deadbolt scraped. The knob jiggled. Duke's ears snapped forward. Ethan's hand went up, 2 fingers, the smallest gesture. And Duke sank silently to a sit. The door didn't open. Not yet. A lock can be a wall or a clock, and this one was counting down. Ethan scanned the alley, one way out to the street, one to the trash-laced service lane. He noted the dip where water pooled and the stack of milk crates as high as Emma's shoulder. He measured the distance from where he stood to where he'd need to stand if the door kicked wide. Breathe in, breathe out, move if you must, wait if you can. He looked back at Emma. "Got people who will pick you up?" She shook her head, the motion barely there. "Dad works nights. He didn't know she would." The rest of the sentence drowned under the weight of everything she didn't have words for. "You got the picture," Ethan said. "And the doll." He nodded at the cloth figure, its crooked smile clenched with cold. "Those are the important things." Emma glanced down. The doll's arm hung by a seam thread. She pinched it back into place awkwardly, and something in Ethan's eyes tightened, then eased, like a memory going through him and leaving his mouth closed. He touched the locket again, just to graze, and then dropped his hand, business returning to his posture. "We're going to step out of this alley, slowly. Duke will walk on your right. I'll be on your left. If anybody speaks to you, you talk to me. That okay?" Emma swallowed, then nodded. "Okay." They moved. Duke matched Emma's tiny steps, brushing the back of her calf just enough to say, "Here, here, here," with each stride. Ethan kept his body between Emma and the door, the window, the line of sight from the street. The alley spat them into the wider cold of the avenue. Cars hissed by on wet asphalt. A neon sign across the way buzzed. Somewhere a friar popped, what sounded like applause. Ethan guided them to a bus stop shelter. It wasn't warm, but it had a roof and an advertisement that half blocked the wind. He sat Emma on the bench and checked the corners out of habit, ceiling screws, sight lines, the way the glass had spidered and then been taped back with cheap, shrug-coloured strips. "Here," he said, offering a granola bar from a pocket that seemed to contain the small inventions of survival. Emma unwrapped it with slow, careful hands. She ate like a promise you don't want to rush. Duke, satisfied with the situational geometry, stretched at their feet, chin on paws. When Emma's sleeve slipped back, the edge of the Polaroid peeped. Ethan didn't stare. He just let his own locket hang visible, like 2 flags of a private country had been raised and seen. "That your mum?" he asked, gentle. Emma nodded. "She says I belong anywhere I'm brave." "She sounds right," Ethan said. A siren whined, then faded. The alley door banged open again behind them. Jolene's voice, sharpened by a phone, pressed too hard to her ear. "Yes, officer, she ran off with some man. No, I don't know him. Send someone, she's not safe, he's got a dog." Duke didn't move, but his ears acknowledged the sound, and filed it. Ethan's jaw flexed once. He turned slightly, using the shelter's frame to break the line of sight. He didn't flinch at the word man. He'd been called worse by better, but at "she's not safe," his eyes went old and clear. "Emma," he said, not whispering, not loud. "You did nothing wrong." Emma's mouth trembled. She slid the Polaroid out, and for a moment the bus stop took both her and her mother in, two girls from 2 times looking brave in bad weather. Emma's thumb traced the edge. The doll, tucked under her arm, eased a stitch of weight into her, the way small things do. Across the street, a patrol car turned onto their block. Its lights weren't on, but you didn't need lights to feel a thing arriving. Jolene stood in the doorway of the row house now, coat open, hair scraped back, hands thrown. She pointed, theatrically. The neighbor on the stoop next door glanced over, assessing, and then looked away. The city knows how to keep its head down. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Okay," he said to nobody in particular. "We do this the right way." He stepped just enough to put himself squarely between Emma and the approaching trouble. Duke rose without a sound, shoulders lifted, tail low, a line drawn in good manners and steel. Emma looked at Ethan's profile. It wasn't the jaw or the steadiness that undid her. It was the way he stood, like the idea of leaving didn't live in his body anymore. She slid the Polaroid back into her pocket, and very carefully her small hand found a fold of Ethan's jacket. She didn't tug, she just rested there. "I'll stay," Ethan said, answering a question she hadn't asked aloud. A gust blew trash in a clattering arc. It caught the cloth doll in the crook of Emma's arm. For a heartbeat the doll lifted, then slipped. Emma reached, missed. The doll bumped the bus stop's curb and fell into a drift of grey snow, face up, one button eye turned toward the cold sky. Emma made a small sound, the kind that fits in your fist. She opened her mouth to apologize, to ask, to promise, but what came out instead was a thread-thin whisper. "Please, don't let them send me back." The patrol car rolled to the curb with the slow inevitability of a tide. Doors opened. 2 officers stepped out, coats dark with mist, hands visible. The older one, Sergeant Stripes, careful eyes, took in the geometry in a blink. Man, child, dog, a woman across the street shouting, neighbors hovering in windows like punctuation marks. Duke stood at Ethan's knee, not a sound, not a tremor, the pupil-wide attention of a partner waiting for a single verb. "Afternoon," the sergeant said, voice level. "Everybody safe here?" Ethan didn't move from in front of Emma. "We are." He kept his hands where they could be seen. "I'm Ethan Cole. This is Emma. We've got a domestic back there." He tipped his chin toward the row house. "We can talk." Jolene's coat flapped as she stalked halfway into the street. "She's a runaway," she snapped, pointing at Emma as if pointing could change the truth of anything. "He tried to take her. He's hiding her with that animal." Duke's ear flicked. The sergeant cut Jolene a look that said, "Not your turn," and returned his attention to Ethan and Emma. "Mind if I step closer?" "Come ahead," Ethan said. "Duke, steady." The younger officer's hand hovered near his belt. The sergeant gave the smallest shake of his head, a veteran's correction. He crouched, so he was eye level with the bus shelter bench. "Emma, is it? You hurt?" Emma's fingers were wet where she'd shoved them into her cardigan sleeves. The question was too kind. It unclasped something inside her. She shook her head and then, very quietly, "She told me I don't belong." Duke's chest expanded, a dog's sigh disguised as discipline. Ethan kept his gaze on the sergeant's, steady as a nail. "She was put out in the cold," he said. "No coat, no plan. I intervened. We need to get Emma safe, not return to that door so it can slam again." Jolene scoffed. "You don't know anything. Her father is your husband," Ethan said, not unkindly, not kind. "Working nights, according to Emma." He kept his voice pulled tight with respect. "Sergeant, ask dispatch for the on-call family services and a supervisor. And if you'll note the temperature, the condition of the child, and the witness statements from the block before any transition is considered, I'd be obliged." The younger officer frowned. "You a lawyer?" "Soldier," Ethan said. "Been near enough lawyers to pick up a few verbs." The sergeant's mouth quirked like a man who's been waiting to be talked to like a professional all day. He keyed his radio and asked for the things Ethan had mentioned. Across the street, a third-floor sash slid up, and a neighbor leaned out with a phone, already recording, already narrating quietly to the invisible court of public memory. "Ma'am," the sergeant called to Jolene, "I'm going to ask you to wait on your porch. We'll get statements. You'll have a chance to talk." Jolene hesitated, then retreated 2 steps, but her glare stayed. Ethan took off his cap and knelt, making himself smaller, softer, in the same movement. "Emma," he said, "the officers are going to help us sort this. You can tell the truth. You don't owe anyone the version that hurts you." Emma looked from Ethan to the sergeant. Her hand, without asking her first, sought the edge of Ethan's jacket again. He didn't look down at it. His shoulder just settled like a post accepts weight. The sergeant's gaze travelled to the Polaroid corner peeking from Emma's pocket. "That your mum?" he asked gently. Emma nodded. "She says I belong anywhere I'm brave." "That's a good mother," the sergeant said. Duke lowered himself until his ribs kissed the concrete, chin on paws, eyes on the whole perimeter. Ethan brushed 2 fingers along the back of the dog's neck. "Good, hold." And Duke's tail moved once in a whisper of fur. A few minutes later, a battered sedan drifted onto the block and parked 2 doors up. A man in a neon work vest climbed out, tired down to the bones. He saw Emma first. His face cracked open in terror, and then relief, equal parts. "Emma," he called, stumbling into a run. Emma flinched, then breathed, then broke into a smile so sudden it hurt to look at. "Dad," she said, and the word changed the temperature of everything. Ethan shifted aside, giving the road room. Duke rose, alert. Ethan's hand said friend, and the dog's posture eased. The man, Marco, dropped to his knees and gathered Emma up, jacket and all, as if he was trying to memorize her shape into his sternum. "Baby, I'm sorry," he kept saying into her hair. "I didn't know. She told me you were with the neighbor. I didn't know." Jolene's voice tried to cut through the reunion. "She lies," she said. "She leaves things out. She's trouble." Emma went smaller in her father's arms, but didn't disappear. Marco looked at Ethan over Emma's shoulder, the way a drowning man looks at the dock hand who got the rope to him in time. "You helped her?" Ethan dipped his head. Heard the shouting, heard the door. Heard a little kid do her best to make herself smaller than the weather. He kept what he'd like to say about Jolene folded back under the locket. The chain was cold against his skin. He pressed it with a thumb out of sight. Elena would have been this age now. A thought rose and dissolved. He let it go. He was here. Family services arrived. One social worker with a scarf the color of patience, clipboard tucked against her hip. She moved with a practiced quiet and spoke with a kind of gravity that absorbs panic instead of reflecting it. "I'm Miss Alvarez," she said. "Let's get warm while we talk." The sergeant nodded at the storefront across the way, bodega lights bright against the grey, and the owner, who'd been watching and shaking his head at the world, waved them in, already shoving coffee toward the register and a paper cup of milk toward Emma, unasked. Inside, the cold left their faces in strips, color returning like news. Ms. Alvarez crouched, eye level with Emma, and held out a palm. "Can I sit with you while your dad signs some papers and we make a plan?" Emma studied her the way children do, with the eyes of people who have had to be their own bouncers. Then she took the social worker's hand. It was warm, unringed, steady. "I'm going to ask questions," Ms. Alvarez said. "You can answer or not, and if anyone interrupts you, I will ask them to wait, okay?" Emma nodded. She looked at the Polaroid as if to borrow courage, then set it face up on the table between them like a family member at the meeting. Jolene tried to follow them inside, but the sergeant's body was a door. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll take your statement after. You'll sit, you'll breathe. You won't speak to the child until we've finished our work." It wasn't a threat. It was a set of rails. Ethan stood near the window, half in the room, half back on the street with his attention. Duke lay at his boots like a shadow that could fight. People came and went. Time made its small and big noises, paperwork unfurled. Marco signed, Ms. Alvarez documented. The sergeant took notes that sounded like a man hammering fence posts. In the quiet between questions, Ethan touched the locket again. He hadn't meant to show it. Habits like that are old. But Ms. Alvarez noticed without prying. "You served?" she asked softly. He nodded. "And I lost a family when I wasn't there." He surprised himself by saying it out loud. "Maybe I'm learning to stand in the door earlier." "That's a good sentence," she said. "Standing in the door earlier." Duke's head came up without moving the rest of him. Ethan followed the line of the dog's attention. Across the street, Jolene had stepped off her porch. She wasn't watching the window now. She was glancing sideways toward the alley, where a second shadow detached itself from the brick, a man with a cheap leather jacket and a bad idea. He traded something small into her palm. Ethan didn't need to see metal to know the shape. He didn't move. He watched, indexed, breathed. The sergeant followed his gaze like a man who reads other men's eyes for a living, his jaw set. "We may have a problem," Ethan said quietly. Said the sergeant. He lifted his radio. "Unit 3, go ahead and drift past the alley, slow." His partner slid out the door like smoke. Back at the table, Ms. Alvarez slid a blank placement form toward Marco. "Here's what we'll do," she said. "Emma goes with her father tonight, pending a home check. We'll connect you to a counselor. There will be a safety plan. And Jolene," she added, "letting the name be just a name and not a judge's sentence. We'll have conditions. We set them. If they aren't met, we revisit custody. For now, we protect the smallest one in the room." Marco's face broke again. He nodded, swallowing everything he couldn't say. Emma let out a breath like air leaving a balloon and then settling back into its proper shape. She looked at Ethan. He gave her a small, not for anyone else smile and tipped 2 fingers off his cap. Duke thumped his tail once. The bell over the bodega door jangled. The younger officer re-entered, expression careful. He murmured to the sergeant. A flicker crossed the older man's face. Relief, mixed with the taste of gunpowder that never quite leaves a career. "Recovered," he said under his breath to Ethan. "Pocket knife. No firearm. Enough for a talk. Not enough for bracelets?" "Yeah." Ethan nodded. He let the coil in his back ease, but not unwind. Jolene's voice, filtered through the glass, rose and fell on the sidewalk like a broken seesaw. She was on her phone again, venom braiding with pleas. The neighbor in the window above continued to quietly film, domestic journalism in a bathrobe. Mrs. Alvarez finished the final lines, drew a box around her last signature like a woman who believes in the geometry of care, and slid the papers for the sergeant's countersign. "All right," she said, turning to Emma. "You go home with your dad, not the row house, for tonight. A relative, a friend, somewhere warm and kind. Tomorrow we check the space and make changes. Tonight we stop the bleeding." Emma nodded. She lifted the Polaroid from the table, kissed 2 fingers, and pressed them to her mother's laughing face. "We did it," she whispered, and the sentence put a small light in the room that the bad weather couldn't quite reach. They stood to leave. Ethan stepped back to let father and daughter take the center of the frame. Duke pivoted with him, perfectly bracketed. The sergeant held the door, caught Ethan's eye. "Thanks for getting small in the right places and big in the others," he said. "Comes with the leash," Ethan said, and Duke's ear flicked as if to agree. Outside, the street had gone to pearl. Evening pressed in. Marco lifted Emma, jacket and all, and carried her toward his car like she was both fragile and made of iron. Ms. Alvarez tucked a card into his pocket. The younger officer moved to walk Jolene back to her porch, speaking in that flat, patient tone good cops learn to wear like a raincoat. Ethan stood for a second with his palm on the bodega door, as if reading the wood's pulse. The locket bumped once against his chest. He looked down at Duke. "Come on, partner," he said. "Let's see them to the corner." They took 3 steps. A sedan that hadn't belonged to the block at all pulled up fast and wrong, tires scrubbing. The passenger windows slid down with the smooth sound that never means a good thing at dusk. Ethan saw a forearm, bare and cold, angle into the space. The gleam that followed wasn't a knife this time. Duke's throat made a sound like a sentence ending. The street went very quiet around the hum of an engine and the low, unmistakable click of a safety coming off. The world shrank to the snarl of rubber against asphalt and the long, hard gleam of a pistol barrel clearing the sedan's window. Ethan's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the muscle memory of 1,000 split-second decisions. His hand brushed Duke's shoulder, the silent signal of steady but ready. The German shepherd braced, ears pinned forward, a growl caught in his throat like thunder waiting for release. Marco froze mid-step. Emma clutched against him. Her small hand clung tighter to his jacket, sensing danger before she could name it. The Polaroid in her pocket bent against her ribs. She whispered something no one else heard, a plea too soft for the storm of engines and breath. The sergeant was already moving. "Gun!" he barked, voice sharp as a crack of lightning. His partner drew down, stepping wide for angle, body low. Civilians on the sidewalk scattered into doorways, the city's instinct for cover sharper than its instinct for curiosity. Ethan didn't think, he measured. He stepped forward, making himself a wall between the car and the child. He'd carried bodies heavier than bullets. He would again if he had to. The driver shouted something lost in the weather. The man with the gun steadied his arm. For a beat, the entire block breathed in at once. "Drop it!" the sergeant roared, his pistol aimed clean, stance like bedrock. The armed man's eyes flicked, calculation, hesitation, pride. Duke's growl deepened into a rumble that made the ground itself feel untrustworthy. Ethan let his locket slip against his chest, a reminder of a promise he hadn't kept once and would not break again. His voice carried low, but iron-bound. "Not this kid, not tonight." The barrel wavered. For half a second it looked like choice might win. Then the man sneered, curling his lip around a decision. The safety click had already spoken louder than reason. Emma's doll slipped from Marco's arm, tumbling into the slush, its button eye glinting in the harsh glow of headlights. Emma gasped, the sound slicing through the standoff like a bell toll. The gunman flinched, just enough. The sergeant fired first, a controlled shot, angled, deliberate. The round tore into the sedan's mirror, shattering glass into diamonds that rained across the hood. The gunman recoiled, cursing, weapon clattering from his hand into the street. Duke lunged at the sound, stopping only at Ethan's sharp hand signal. Hold. Tires screamed as the sedan jerked into reverse, fishtailing, then tearing off into the night, with the driver swearing out the window. The gun lay abandoned, steaming faintly in the cold. Emma's whisper carried through the ringing aftermath. "Please, don't let them send me back." Ethan crouched in front of her, placing a hand firm and steady on her father's arm. His eyes held hers, grounding her in the storm. "They won't," he said, voice rough with vow. And for the first time that night, Emma believed it. The street smelled of gunpowder and snowmelt. Shards of glass glittered in the gutter like frozen stars, scattered testimony to what had just almost happened. Marco still held Emma, knuckles white against her tiny frame. She pressed her face into his chest, but her eyes, wide and wet, kept darting back to the fallen pistol lying in the slush. The cloth doll lay beside it, half buried, its crooked smile staring up at the sky. The sergeant kicked the weapon further from reach, then barked into his radio for backup units. His partner retrieved it with a gloved hand, slipping it into an evidence bag. The patrol car's lights finally came alive, red and blue slicing across the block, turning neighbors' windows into watching eyes. Ethan stayed where he was, one knee in the snow, a hand firm on Duke's collar. The German shepherd's muscles trembled, not from fear, but from the electric restraint of held instinct. Ethan leaned in, whispered low into the dog's ear. "Good boy, you did exactly what we needed." Duke's tail thudded once against the ground, controlled, still alert. Across the street, Jolene was frozen on her porch, phone hanging slack at her side. Her expression twisted, not victory, not even anger. Something darker, like the ground beneath her, had shifted, and she didn't know where to stand anymore. The sergeant strode toward her. "Ma'am, you've got explaining to do. That car wasn't random. We'll get prints off that gun. You want to dig deeper into this hole, or you want to cooperate?" Jolene's mouth opened, shut. She retreated a step, back into the shadows of her doorway. Inside the bodega, Ms. Alvarez had watched it all through the glass, her clipboard pressed against her chest. Now she came out, scarf fluttering. "Enough exposure for the girl," she said sharply to the officers. "Get her inside now. Trauma doesn't heal in the street." Marco carried Emma back through the door. Ethan followed, Duke pacing beside him, casting one last look over his shoulder at the flashing lights before settling into the warmth. The bodega owner shoved space heaters closer, muttering prayers under his breath. He slid Emma a cup of cocoa he hadn't charged anyone for. She took it with both hands, the steam painting color back into her cheeks. Ethan crouched in front of her, close enough to be heard above the police radios. He picked up the doll from where it had fallen, brushed the snow off, and handed it back to her. "Lost things can be found again," he said. Emma stared at him, lips trembling, then clutched the doll to her chest, as if the crooked stitches themselves were a promise. Marco's voice cracked. I never should have left you with her like that." He looked at Ms. Alvarez, shame raw in his face. "I thought I was protecting her by working nights. I didn't know what was happening." "Now you do," Ms. Alvarez said gently, but with steel under it. "And now you get a second chance. Don't waste it." Ethan stood, his knees popping like old doors. He adjusted his cap, the motion slow, deliberate. His locket swung once against his chest, catching Emma's curious gaze. For a moment she looked as though she might ask, but instead she whispered, "Thank you." Outside, another squad car pulled up, its lights cutting long shadows. The storm had calmed, but the night was far from done. The sergeant stepped in, snow clinging to his boots. "Cole," he said, "we'll need your statement. But for
Now, his eyes flicked to Emma and Marco. "For now, we hold the line here." Ethan nodded once, hand dropping to Duke's head. "That's what we came for." Emma, sipping cocoa, leaned against her father's side. Her eyes closed, not in fear this time, but in the first fragile drift of safety. And then, faintly from the doorway, a neighbor's voice whispered, "Miracle in despair." The warmth of the bodega wrapped around them like a fragile shelter, but outside the storm had left its signature, police tape, flashing lights, and the heavy tread of more officers filling the block. Emma leaned into Marco, her cocoa cooling in her hands. She stared at the crooked doll in her lap, brushing snow from its button eye. The world outside still felt jagged, but the small ritual of caring for something broken gave her a rhythm to breathe by. Ethan stood near the window, his silhouette tall, watchful. Duke pressed against his leg, nose twitching at every new scent the door carried in. The soldier's gaze wasn't restless, just deliberate, scanning each movement on the street with the patience of a man who had learned survival was in the noticing. Ms. Alvarez sat across from Marco, pen scratching quietly on her clipboard. "We'll file for emergency protection tonight," she said. "Jolene will face questioning, And until we have a court order, Emma stays with you, but you'll need to follow every step we outline. Understood?" Marco nodded. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion and regret, but his grip on Emma never loosened. "Understood. Whatever it takes." Emma lifted her head. "Will she—" She stopped, voice a whisper. "Will she come back?" "No," Ms. Alvarez said firmly, meeting her eyes. "Not tonight. Not while we're here." Ethan finally stepped forward. He crouched to Emma's height, resting a hand lightly on Duke's back. "And even when we're gone, you won't be alone. Your dad's here. And so is the truth. Lies only work until someone listens the right way." Emma's small hand brushed the doll's face. "She said I didn't belong?" Ethan touched his locket, feeling the worn metal under his thumb. "Sometimes people say things because they're afraid of what you remind them of. But belonging isn't something she gets to decide." His voice was gravel, but steady. "You belong where you're loved. That's the only rule worth keeping." The sergeant stepped inside, shaking snow from his hat. "Cole," he said, "your statement lined up with the witnesses. The gunman's being traced. We've got Jolene talking. Says she didn't know he'd pull a weapon, but the exchange was clear enough. She's in custody tonight." Emma flinched at the name. Ethan leaned closer. "You hear that? Custody. That means she can't touch you." Relief shivered through her like a draft, finding its way out of old walls. Marco exhaled shakily. "I should have seen it sooner,"
he whispered. "I thought I was giving Emma stability by keeping the house, by keeping the marriage together. But all I gave her was silence to hide in." Ms. Alvarez closed her clipboard with a quiet snap. "Then here's your second chance. Don't waste it. Healing isn't erasing the past. It's building something better in spite of it." Duke nudged Emma's knee with his nose. She smiled faintly, stroking his fur with tentative fingers. For the first time, her touch didn't tremble. Ethan rose, his joints protesting. He glanced out the window again. The street was calmer now, but the echoes of violence still lingered in the corners. He knew enough to recognize when a chapter was closing, and when another, harder one, was about to begin. The sergeant's radio crackled, words lost under static, but the tone enough to tighten Ethan's shoulders. He looked back at Marco and Emma. "You've got tonight. Make it count. Tomorrow's another fight." Marco hugged Emma tighter, whispering something into her hair. Ethan turned to the door, Duke already anticipating the move. The soldier touched his locket once, murmured under his breath, and stepped back into the night. The storm had broken, but the war of belonging was far from over. The snow had slowed to a fine drift, falling in lazy spirals that disguised how raw the night still felt. The patrol cars had gone, the bodega lights dimmed, and Marco carried Emma out wrapped in Ethan's jacket. She clutched the crooked doll, eyelids heavy but refusing to close. Ethan walked a few steps behind, Duke's paws leaving neat prints in the slush. The soldier's posture was straight, but the locket at his chest felt heavier than the rifle he'd once carried. Every time he glanced at Emma's small frame, memory pressed at him. Another little girl, another night, a war zone he couldn't rewrite. Marco's car was dented, the passenger door stiff, but it started after a cough. Ms. Alvarez had insisted they drive to Marco's sister's house, neutral ground, warm beds, a place where paperwork could catch up with compassion. "Will you come?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice thin but cutting through the hum of the engine. Ethan hesitated at the curb. He had meant to step back, to let family reclaim itself, but Duke nudged his thigh and Emma's eyes stayed locked on him, searching for a promise. "I'll follow," he said at last, "just until you're safe." The drive was short, but every turn carried the weight of possibility. Another car shadowing them, another figure at the corner. Ethan's gaze swept the mirrors, Duke alert at every change in pitch outside. When they reached the sister's house, a narrow brick home with lights glowing like beacons, relief softened Marco's face. His sister, Isabella, opened the door before they knocked. She pulled Emma into her arms without asking questions, her own children crowding the hall in wide-eyed silence. Inside, the bad air smelled of rice and cinnamon, the comfort of lived-in walls. Emma relaxed for the first time, laying her head on Isabella's shoulder. Marco stood frozen, watching the two women, one who had failed him, one who had saved him, collide in his daughter's story. Ethan lingered near the door, Duke pressed to his side. Isabella turned to him. "You're coming in too," she said firmly, as if she'd already decided he belonged. He shook his head. "This is family." But Emma's whisper carried across the hall. "Please." He stepped in. Dinner plates appeared like magic, warmth filling stomachs that had known too much cold. Emma sat between Marco and Isabella, the doll propped in her lap, Duke lying across her feet like a blanket. For a while, the storm outside was just weather, nothing more. Later, when the children had been tucked into beds and the house quieted, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The snow had stopped. He lit no cigarette, made no call, just stared into the stillness. The locket caught the moonlight, a reminder that even miracles had their price. Marco joined him, hands shoved in his pockets. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," Ethan said. His voice was low, worn. "Just don't waste the chance." Marco nodded. "She's been through too much. I'll fix it, I swear." Ethan didn't reply. He watched Duke lift his head, ears pricking. Somewhere down the block, a car idled too long, then eased away. Ethan's hand found Duke's collar. The night was quiet, but not safe. Not yet. The house slept. The storm outside had emptied itself, leaving the streets hushed, muffled in white. From the upstairs window, faint breathing and the rustle of blankets told Ethan the children were finally resting. Emma lay curled against her father. The crooked doll clutched tight in her arms. Duke stretched across the floorboards like a living shield. But Ethan didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his back against a wooden post, cap pulled low, locket in hand. The chain had worn a groove into his skin over the years, as if grief needed a place to live. He turned it slowly, thumb brushing the dented silver, the memory of another face inside it always waiting to look back. Elena. His daughter's name drifted up like smoke from an old fire. She would have been Emma's age by now, 6, with her mother's laugh and his stubborn jaw. He'd been halfway across the world when fever took her. No gun to fight, no enemy to disarm. Just distance. Just silence. Just too late. The boards creaked softly. Marco stepped out, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You should rest," he said. "Rest is expensive," Ethan answered. He didn't look up. Marco leaned against the railing, arms folded. "She asked about you before she closed her eyes. Wanted to know if you'd still be here in the morning." Ethan finally lifted his gaze. "And what did you tell her?" "That I don't decide who belongs. Any more?" Marco said quietly. "I've been wrong enough times tonight." They stood in silence. Snowflakes drifted down, slower now, fat and soft. Somewhere in the dark, an engine hummed, not close, not far. Too patient to be innocent. Duke's head lifted, ears pointed, body tense. A low growl trembled in his chest. Ethan was on his feet before the sound fully registered. His eyes scanned the block, empty except for the faint gleam of headlights 2 corners down. The car idled, then its lights clicked off, leaving only the faint outline of its shadow. "They're not finished," Ethan muttered. Marco's face drained. "The same men?" "Could be," Ethan said. His voice was flat, soldier steady. "They don't like losing, and Jolene wasn't making calls to friends. She was making calls to people who trade in fear." He touched the locket again, grounding himself. "They'll test the door again." Inside, Emma stirred. A child's half-whisper cut through the night, floating down the stairwell. "Please, don't let them send me back." Ethan's jaw tightened. He reached down, brushed his hand along Duke's back, The dog's muscles coiled, waiting for the order. Marco looked at him, helpless. "What do we do?" Ethan's eyes narrowed on the shadow at the end of the street. "We make sure she knows this house isn't just walls." He pulled the cap lower over his brow. "It's a fortress tonight, and anyone who thinks otherwise—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but the steel in his voice completed it. Duke's growl deepened. The night wasn't done testing them. The car's shadow lingered at the far end of the block, silent as a question no one wanted answered. Snow hissed softly against the hood, melting into rivulets that caught the faint street lamp glow. Ethan stood on the porch, weight balanced evenly, every nerve listening. Duke pressed at his thigh, a live wire of muscle and patience. Marco hovered just inside the door, one hand on the frame, torn between shielding Emma upstairs and stepping out to stand with Ethan. The headlights flared back on. The sedan rolled forward slowly, crunching snow under its tires, like a predator testing the edge of its prey's circle. Ethan raised a hand. "Stay." Marco froze. Duke's growl trembled into the boards. The window on the driver's side lowered halfway. A face leaned into the slice of cold air, a man with scars across his cheek, eyes sunken from nights spent feeding on shadows. His voice carried, oily and casual. "She doesn't belong with you." He jerked his chin toward the house. "Send the girl out. Settle this clean." Ethan's locket pressed against his chest, as if Eleanor herself was leaning on him. His reply was low, unshaken. "She belongs where she's loved. That means not with you." The man's smile thinned. "Wrong answer." The passenger door opened. Another figure stepped out, heavier, holding a length of pipe that glinted under the streetlight. He swung it once, threatening. "Back inside," Marco whispered, panic in his voice. But Ethan didn't move. He stepped down the porch instead, snow crunching under his boots. Duke followed, hackles high, tail low, every line of his body spelling readiness. "You've got one chance to leave," Ethan said, voice flat as iron. The man with the pipes sneered. "And if we don't?" Duke launched before the word "don't" had finished. He hit the ground running, a streak of fur and muscle, the sound of fury bound by training. The man shouted, stumbling back as Duke's snarl split the night. The driver reached for something at his waist, but the sudden blaze of red and blue lights flooded the street, sirens piercing. Patrol cars swung in from both ends of the block, boxing the sedan in. The sergeant's voice thundered over the loudspeaker. "On the ground now, drop everything." The pipe clattered. The driver froze. Officers swarmed, efficient and relentless, dragging both men to the snow, cuffing them under a chorus of shouted commands. Ethan gave Duke a sharp command. "Hold!" And the dog stopped short, chest heaving, teeth bared, but obeying. The sergeant strode over, holstering his weapon. "Knew they'd circle back. We had a unit tailing. Glad you kept them busy." Ethan nodded once, chest rising and falling slowly. The adrenaline made his fingers twitch, but the locket steadied him. Marco stepped onto the porch, Emma in his arms. She was awake, her eyes wide but calm. She looked at the flashing lights, then at Ethan, then whispered, with the fragile certainty of a prayer. "You didn't let them send me back." Ethan met her gaze. For the first time in years, something inside his chest loosened. He touched the locket, whispering so only Duke could hear. "We did better this time." The sergeant ordered the car towed, evidence collected. Neighbors spilled out, murmuring, some with phones raised, others with quiet words of relief. Isabella hugged Marco and Emma tight, her tears shining in the lights. Ethan stepped back into the snow, letting the family take the center. He wasn't part of their blood, but tonight he had stood in the doorway when it mattered. Emma lifted the doll, crooked smile and all, and held it out toward him. "For luck," she whispered. He shook his head softly. "No, you keep that. It belongs with you." Duke pressed his head against Ethan's leg. The night was quieter now, peace stitched together with sacrifice and second chances. The storm had passed, and, for Emma, for Marco, and even for the weary soldier with the loyal canine at his side, healing had begun.